Quran to support the case of its own text uh, to be divine. The Quran claims that the Quran is God's book and that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, is indeed God's messenger. Uh, this presentation, this claim has not been made in a way that the reader is forced to believe in what has been mentioned, nor are the progeny of the people who are Muslims required to blindly accept the fact that because they're born Muslims, therefore they ought to believe in what has been given to them as God's revelation. The fact of the matter is that if you start understanding the Quran, you come to learn that the Quran is providing us with evidences after evidences, proofs after proofs, to feel comfortable with the idea that the Quran is God's word and that Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, is indeed God's messenger. When we look at the arguments that have been presented to support this understanding, uh, one can divide them into four different categories. There are four categories of arguments to show, to feel good and comfortable about the fact that the revelation that we are reading, we are going through, is from God. The first category is the category of character. The Quran mentions the fact that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, who brought this book, lived in Mecca for 40 years before he started receiving divine revelation. During these 40 years, he lived amongst his uh, fellow citizens of Mecca. Uh, they experienced him, they dealt with him, they did business with him, they were neighbors with him, etc. In a very small town of only a few thousand people, everybody knew everybody else. And this man was known to be as-Sadiq, the truthful, and Al-Amin, uh, the reliable, the trustworthy. It was only after this background of his impeccable character was shown to the people that he started receiving divine revelation. And he asked people to consider his claim in the backdrop of what he was and the character that he had shown. Uh, it is because of this reason that for the very first time, he attracted the attention of the people of Mecca uh, towards his message. The first thing that he mentioned was that if he were to claim that there was an army just about prepared to launch an attack on Mecca, would they believe him? And they all said in one voice when he stood up on the Mount of Safa, all of them who gathered there said, well, we have experienced nothing but the truth from you. Therefore, if you are making that claim, we'll accept it readily. And then he made his presentation of the revelation that he had received by then. And people turned his enemy because what he mentioned was against their traditional religion. The Quran mentions in Surah Yunus, Surah 10, verse 16, فَقَدْ لَبِثْتُ فِيكُمْ عُمُرًا مِّن قَبْلِهِ. I have lived with you for a lifetime before making this presentation. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do you not think? Do you not ponder? This mention also includes the understanding that for 40 years, I have not shown any interest whatsoever in matters that can be described as literary. I've never been a poet, nor have I been an orator. Uh, I've been a simple man from that point of view. In fact, The Almighty arranged for the Prophet to be not literate. He didn't know how to read, nor did he know how to write. And yet, after 40 years of the life that he spent as an absolutely outstanding, morally upright person, he presented a book which for the next 22, 23 years surprised everybody uh, as far as its beauty and effect of expression was concerned. So that was one thing, the character of the Prophet. The Prophet brought with him this message, the book, which is now, uh, for the rest of the world, as long as it exists, uh, the biggest proof, evidence supporting his claim that he is God's messenger. Surah Yasin, Surah 36, first three verses mention Yasin wal Quran al Hakim. This is Surah Yasin, and the wise book, the wise Quran, is a testimony of the fact, Innaka lamin al mursaleen, that indeed you are from amongst the messengers. Uh, this book has a number of features, one of which is that it has been fully preserved. The text of the Quran has not been allowed to be altered, to be tampered with. This is mentioned in Surah number 15, Surah Al-Hijr, verse 9. The Almighty says, Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun. Indeed, we are the ones who have revealed this reminder, and we are the ones who are going to ensure its preservation. One of the remarkable books, one of the remarkable features of this book is that it really has been expressed in a language which the people of Mecca and the Arabian Peninsula, they were caught by surprise. Uh, People of the Arabian society were so proud of their language and the talent of their poets and their orators in Arabic, that these people, these poets and orators, etc., they're celebrities. Um, they were the people that others would look up to, and their command over their language and the manner they would express themselves was something that left people in awe. Every year, uh, there would be one piece of poetical expression that would get the privilege of being hung on the wall of Kaaba. It would be called Muallaqa. Uh, there's a book now called Muallaqat, which is comprised of those odes, which were given the privilege of being hung on the wall of Kaaba 1 year, in 1 year or another. Uh, and yet, despite all this talent at their disposal, the Quran, when it started getting revealed and it challenged the foundations of this society, their belief system, and the kind of uh, worship that they were indulged in, and their religious traditions, everything was questioned and challenged. And people started getting impressed by the presentation of the Quran. The Quran, in the middle of this presentation, offered to the people of Arabian society to come up with a response and be able to thus get away from what the Quran was presenting. The Quran said that if you think that it's not from God, then bring a surah like it, and the challenge of the Quran will be fully met. So this is what is mentioned in two other occasions, but in Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, verse 23 to 24, the Almighty says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا. And if you are in any doubt about the fact that this book is from us and we have revealed it to our servant, فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ, then bring forth a surah, one surah like it, like any of the surahs of the Quran. وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ, and bring forth your supporters except for God. In kuntum sadiqeen, if you are really truthful. If you are truthful in your claim that this book is not from God, then bring any one surah which can compare in beauty and literary excellence of the presentation of the Quran. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا, but if you're not able to, you're not going to be able to do it. وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, and you shall not be able to do it. فَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ الَّتِي وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ, then fear uh, the fire whose fuel is either going to be men or stones. Uh, it's a fact that this challenge was thrown across, and it wasn't met even by the people who otherwise used to be so proud of their poetry and their oratory that they would think that the rest of the world is dumb and Ajami is dumb. They can't even speak. But they were speechless when it came to this, the challenge of the Quran. The Quran goes further to mention the fact that this book, apart from other reasons, has to be accepted and acknowledged as a book from God, because this book has undergone no changes, no, it sees no variation, no conflicts within its text. It mentions in verse 82 of Surah An-Nisa, Surah number 4, it says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, do they not ponder over the contents of the Quran? وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ إِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ, had it been from anyone other than God, لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا, they would have found in it lots of discrepancy. That is, human beings, when they make their presentations over a period of time, they learn, they evolve, they change, they discard their earlier opinions, and it is perfectly fine for humans to do so, even for the most outstanding of the humans, the geniuses. Why? Because that's what is natural. We all learn, we improve, and as a consequence of our learning, we go through a journey where we accept a few things and we reject others. And our journey of life shows that we have moved on, we have changed, we've altered, we have contradicted our own statements, etc. But here is one presentation which presents a completely different pattern. For the first 40 years, the man who presented the book has nothing to present as far as literary excellence is concerned, intellectual piece of reasoning is concerned. He presents himself as a remarkably impeccable person as far as his character was concerned. But all of a sudden, without any prior training, without any interest in literary or intellectual presentations, he comes up with a message which for the next 22, 23 years is completely consistent as far as the style and the quality of his presentation is concerned. It was sublime from day one till the very end, as well as from the point of view of the consistency of ideas, of facts that were mentioned in the book. So that the Quran says that this itself is a reason, an important reason, why the Quran ought to be considered a book from God. And the only way one can understand that this argument is actually a real, undeniable argument is if we're going to ponder over its verses and reflect deeply. I mentioned probably my very first or second presentation that the Quran asks the reader to think and ponder and reflect over its verses, and it also gives us this understanding as to what exactly should we be looking for apart from other things when we ponder and reflect. And it says that look at the way it is consistent over a period of 22, 23 years, which period was an era when the Prophet was extremely busy. He was involved in so many things simultaneously. And in the middle of all this, he continued to present passages from God, and then they were put together in the form of a book. And the book is remarkably consistent. There is another very interesting way of looking at the Quran now, in this 21st century, 20th, 21st century, 1400 plus years after the Quran was revealed, wherein we now have the privilege of, uh, of knowing many facts, scientific facts, which were hitherto up until now unknown to humanity. Uh, you look at the books of facts, books of science written, authored 200 years ago, and you would find that what they're saying have no application anymore in the modern world. Most of the stuff that they mention has been rejected and replaced by new discoveries, new ideas, new facts. A book revealed something like 1400 plus years ago, which talks about the phenomena of the nature every now and then. It invites the attention of the reader to believe in the faith that it is presenting on the basis of the arguments that are based on the phenomena of the nature. It talks about the heavens and the earth, the stars, the moon, the sun, the clouds, rainfall, uh, crops, animals, humans, oceans, etc., whatnot. And all throughout this presentation, the Quran is talking about facts. The facts which now have been discovered more, more minutely. And what has now been discovered is, uh, is very different from what used to be believed in and accepted in the earlier days. And there have been a number of studies that have made attempts to compare the scientific facts that we have today with the text of the Quran. I obviously cannot go into the details of them, but we have a few examples like that of Maurice Bucay's book, The Quran, the Bible, the Quran, and Science, which is trying to show that the contents of the Quran, unlike in the case of Bible, are remarkably consistent with the facts that we have from the latest scientific knowledge. What is more remarkable is that Maurice Bucay turned a Muslim later on in his life, but there's a gentleman from North America, a little northwards from where you're living in Canada, who died last year, an embryologist, Keith L. Moore. Uh, he was uh, he was surprised to come across some of the claims which are relevant to the science of embryology, of which he was a master. And he felt that what he's reading is a text which is talking on the one hand about things that have got to do with embryology, which was his area of specialization. But on the other hand, what the book was mentioning had nothing wrong in it. No single mention of the book on embryology could be pointed out to be inconsistent with latest facts, those facts which were discovered according to Keith Elmore only recently. And despite being a Christian all throughout his life, he said this couldn't have been possible had it not been a book which was revealed uh, from the heavens, uh, without it being a divine revelation. The Quran also talks about history. There are a number of historical facts mentioned. And by the way, none of these mentions are actually making a claim that the Quran is either a book of science or it's a book of history. And yet, what it talks about history again is remarkably true and consistent with facts. There are at least three references in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 252, Surah Al-Imran, verse 44, and Surah Yusuf 102, wherein the Quran itself is pointing out and attracting the attention of the reader that have you not seen the details that we have mentioned about the past events? How could it be possible, except for the fact that this book is a divine revelation? It has been divinely uh, revealed to the Prophet, and it's not his own work. Obviously, people people can claim that the facts mentioned in the Quran are also mentioned in the Bible. But the fact of the matter is that in all these three references, the Quran is actually talking about the same stories which have been talked about in the Bible. But there are, despite some commonalities, which obviously had to be there because the same stories, when they're mentioned, they've got to be commonalities. But there are prominent differences between the description of the Quran and the Bible. And an objective reader can figure out that what the Quran is mentioning seems to be more reasonable, acceptable, and tenable to reasoning and to what can be described as more natural. Uh, then there is a third category of arguments presented by the Quran, and that is that the Quran has come as a consequence of prophecies that were already there before the arrival of the Prophet regarding his arrival. So the Quran claims that it's a book which had already been announced, whose arrival was already mentioned in the earlier books. In Surah 6, Surah Al-An'am, verse 20, the Quran says, Yarifunahu kama yarifuna abnahum. They recognize this prophet quite the same way as they recognize their own sons. That's the extent of clarity the Quran claims there was in the minds of those people who were knowledgeable people, knowledgeable in the earlier books, that the Quran has come to them not as a surprise, as something which is absolutely new and has come from nowhere all of a sudden. It's a book that was, instead, it was eagerly awaited. Obviously, again, our non-Muslim friends can always ask as to how can we acknowledge this reality when it's only mentioned in your books, in your book. We need to know from our own books. Obviously, I do not have the time to explain the references, but I would just refer to uh, the book of Deuteronomy, which is the fifth book of the Bible, the Old Testament, chapter 18, verses 17 to 19. There is a prophecy which talks about somebody who was to come, who would be like Moses, Musa alayhi salam. God will put his words in his mouth. He will mention whatever God would command him to say. He would be from amongst their brothers, that is, the brothers of the children of Israel, and he would present the message by mentioning the name of God. All these features of the prophecy of somebody to come, when compared with the Quran, are remarkably consistent with what the Quran is. Likewise, in the New Testament Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 19 to 22, we are informed that when Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, was about to arrive, and John the Baptist, Yahya alayhi salam, came before him, uh, the knowledgeable people, the knowledgeable Jews, were waiting for not one, but three different personalities from God. They were waiting for the Messiah, Jesus. They were waiting for Elijah, and they were also waiting for the prophet. So obviously, it's a natural question that arises that if after Jesus Christ there was the prophet also to come, and the book, the Bible is even today mentioning it, who could be the prophet if not Prophet Muhammad? May God's mercy be on him. Last but not the least, the Quran mentioned a fourth category of arguments. I only have time to mention its title, and the argument is the prophecy made by the Prophet himself. Right from day one, when he was all by himself, the Prophet continued to mention that he has come as God's messenger, Rasulullah. And like all other messengers, his message is bound to prevail. This statement he made even when he was all alone. He said that he has come like Moses came to Pharaoh, and then God Almighty destroyed the might of Pharaoh and his companions. In other words, the Quran said, likewise is going to be the case with the enemies of our messenger. This prophecy was made in the Quran over and over and over again. In fact, what you find in the Quran is that this mention is all across the Quran. And finally, when this prophecy proved right and it got implemented, the Almighty mentioned that these people are now getting punished from the Almighty, and obviously that prophecy also came true. So all in all, there are a number of arguments in the Quran which all put together, when we read them, we feel good, confident, and convinced that this book indeed is from God. That's all from me.
Jazakallah. Thank you so much, Dr. Zaheer. Um, so I would open up the floor for anybody on Zoom who wants to ask questions related to the topic of this class, which is our belief in Quran. Some people have private messaged me and asked me if we can ask general questions. So I don't want to stop general questions, but we want to first make sure that we cover this topic, and if there's any time left, then general questions are okay. So go ahead and unmute your microphone and start asking. I'm not keeping count of whoever's raising hands, that who raised the hand first or anything like that. Just unmute your microphone and start asking, please.
This is Usman. Thank you, Khalid Saab. Again, a wonderful presentation. My question is, there's some confusion in my mind in terms of the order of the surahs. Is this how it was revealed, the current form that we have in the form of Quran? Or was this arrangement put together later by the Sahaba, by Hazrat Umar or his predecessor?
That in itself is another remarkable, wonderful topic that can actually be mentioned to show the brilliance of the Quran. The Quran, the manner, the arrangement, the order it is now with us, it wasn't revealed in that order. So it's a substantially altered order, sequence, marshalling from the way it was revealed. But all this was done during the lifetime of the Prophet, may Allah's mercy be on him. The fact of the matter is that this reality, that this arrangement is going to be altered and the Quran is going to be rearranged in a new order, was mentioned in the Quran right at the beginning of the period of revelation. What the later companions did was nothing but putting the same order in writing.
Please mute your microphones. Dr. Zaheer's voice is cutting off. If you guys keep your microphones open, please mute your microphones.
So this order that we have today is the only sequence, the only presentation of the Quran which is valid and acceptable to Muslims. That's how the Prophet left this world, leaving the Quran in this particular order. The companions had no role whatsoever to play as far as arranging the Quran in its present form is concerned, except for the fact that they meticulously put down, they implemented whatever the Prophet had given them.
So just to follow up to that, Dr. Saab, why was there a need to put it in this particular order? Why not? Why did the Prophet not leave it the way it was, as it was revealed?
Although I'll need at least 30 minutes to answer this question, let me try to do it in 30 seconds. You see, the need for the Quran when it was being revealed was different from the need of the Ummah that had actually already emerged at the time of the Prophet and was to grow in number later. And therefore, the new order had to be substantially different from the order in which it was revealed. And, that's what we are trying to show to the people, that this new order of the Quran has lots of wisdom behind it. Maybe I might put it in one of my subsequent sessions as one of the topics.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on Zoom, please unmute your microphone and start asking.
And Dr. Khalid, my question is that I understand, and I may be totally wrong, that after the whole arrangement of the Quran was made, there was pieces of the Quran lying around, and Hazrat Umar collected them so that there's no confusion and destroyed them, so there is only one Quran. Is this correct?
You see, the Quran was revealed to the Prophet. He had it in his memory right from the beginning. He recited the Quran before Muslims on numerous occasions, more particularly during prayers. In the prayers where the Quran, longer passages of the Quran were read out, Muslims, particularly who were close to him, knew that the Quran was one book from A to Z, from Al-Ham to An-Nas, and therefore there was no confusion. Uh, it's another matter that some of the companions did write the Quran as well on their own. You know, it was quite natural to imagine that when there was a book of God that was being given to people as God's book, and there were some people who were literate, some of them wrote a few verses or surahs on their own. Uh, Now that the Quran was complete and it was completely memorized by a large number of people, the existence of some written pieces would have only added to confusion. So I think if they were destroyed, they were done, they were done justifiably so, because their presence would have created unnecessary confusion as to whether these pieces, written correctly or incorrectly, were a part of the Quran or not. What was in the memory of Muslims, and all Muslims had in their memory the same very Quran, that was the original, authentic, official version of the Quran and none else.
Thank you, Dr. Zaheer. Anybody else has questions on Zoom, please unmute your microphone, and Talat Waheed Saiba, please go ahead.
Ji. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Right.
You mentioned something about muallaqat. Could you please elaborate a little bit more as to what they were and what was written on them?
These were poetical expressions, the odes, they were called. Uh, the poets used to come up with their various different presentations, and there used to be what one might call annual competition of who the best poet of the year is. And his poetical presentation, Qasida, would be given the privilege to be hung on the wall of Kaaba for its brilliance. So year after year, this used to happen, and therefore we now have a number of such qasaid, odes, which were given that privilege, and they are called muallaqat. Even today, they are studied in institutions where the Quranic languages is appreciated, is understood. People get trained in the classical Arabic, and one of the sources which enables them to have a grasp of what kind of literary presentation used to take place in those days and how those presentations compare with the Quran. These muallaqat are taught even now, so they are still available.
All right. Anybody else has a question on Zoom? I have a few questions on YouTube and Facebook. If you don't have any questions, I'll go start asking.
Dr. Khalid, my next question is that when you present the Quran or want to talk about it to a non-Muslim, is it a good idea to have like an interfaith dialogue? And if they want to talk about their religious book, we should be prepared to hear what they say and then make our presentation too?
Yes, most certainly. Obviously, I mean, the other person is not somebody who is at the moment accepting our claim. Therefore, we should very wisely listen to what the other person is saying and find the opportunity to present our point of view. It's always going to be that way. We will present our understanding, they will present their understanding, and over a period of time, hopefully, we'll be able to impress upon the other person that our presentation is worthy of being taken seriously.
Ifat Abbasi Saiba, if you want to unmute your microphone, Ifat Abbasi Saiba, if you want to unmute your microphone and start asking, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
First of all, Ramzan Mubarak to Dr. Khalid Zaheer. So, I just wanted to ask that I have read few research papers basically that like current you in the lecture you said the text of Quran is preserved, but when I read those articles, I read like their arguments were very convincing that the actual text of Quran has been changed. Like for according to authors or researchers, they say it's some book written by Arab tribe, and they kept on it kept on changing. So, what's your opinion about that? Like how we can say that, like if we are claiming that our Quran, the text of Quran is preserved, then and they show us are very convincing articles. And frankly speaking, after reading their work, I have no argument, to counter them.
You see, in order for the authenticity of the Quran to be above board, to be beyond any shadow of doubt, the Almighty has arranged for its presentation to be made in such a way that you don't have to go into any research for it. Even a lay person can see for himself that the Quran is fully preserved. How? Just imagine our story. Our story is that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received the Quran, and the Quran got completed during his lifetime. Uh, he presented to this ummah, his followers, one Quran, one version of it from A to Z, rearranged in a completely different order. That Quran was taken by his followers, companions, who were there with him in Medina. And then after he left this world, these companions, some of them at least, they left Medina, migrated to different places. They left this world, and the next generation emerged. All of them had the Quran with them. And when they left this world, a third generation replaced them, and they were transferred with the same Quran. Now, starting from one source, things started getting proliferated all throughout the four corners of this world. Now, if there was this version of the Quran was not the original version, most certainly we should have had in this world of Muslim world a number of different versions of the Quran. What we find is that right from one end of the Eastern world, from Indonesia, to the other end of the Western world, we have the same Quran which is being understood, read, and presented. So this could not have come about had it not been given to the Muslim Ummah by their Prophet, and all of them had the same Quran. The Muslims have a number of differences with each other, but the order, the wordings, and the details of the Quran are absolutely the same. So I think when we have this kind of a very clear, neat presentation of the Quranic preservation, uh, no amount of new research can actually uh, damage this understanding.
Khalid Sab, this is Usma. Maybe the lady who asked the question, I've forgotten the name, and pardon me for that. This might relate to the question that I had asked, and you had explained it very well, that there are the three different versions of the Quran. And the versions are not diametrically opposed to each other, it's the wording that's different. So maybe that's what perhaps the research is referring to, that she has
What,
referenced.
what, what we are claiming is not that there aren't any other claims. Obviously, for a book as important as the Quran, it had to have people who were distractors, who weren't supporting the claim. That's quite natural. So there were people who presented the Quran in somewhat different ways. Some of them probably because they were confused or misled, others because they probably had malified intentions. But the one version which Muslims claim to be from God is available all throughout the Muslim world, even in those places where apparently some other version is also extant. So the version of the Quran, the only Quran which the Almighty promised to preserve as the book of God, is available all throughout the Muslim world. It's not being claimed that people have not come up with other claims, but those claims are, you know, not available everywhere. They are not supported by any solid evidence. It's just another claim somebody has made. And obviously, compared to one consistent, unanimously agreed to version, these smaller claims really have no significance whatsoever.
Thank you very much,
Uh,
sir.
Can I ask one more question? Dr. Khalid, I understand that the Quran, when it was first revealed, Surah Nas came. So now the present arrangement of the Quran, how was that done? Over the years, Allah revealed the surah ayats and Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam memorized it. I'm a little confused as to the final arrangement, how that was done. Thank you.
Surah Nas was never claimed by anybody to the very first revelation, but it was done in a way that the Quran itself explains that Jibreel alayhi salam used to come, read the Quran before the Prophet every year in Ramadan. The Prophet would repeat what he used to say, and this was done in an order which was the final official order. That's how it was done when it was all completed. The revelation was completed in the final year before the Prophet left this world. And this reading of the angel and the reading of the Prophet following him is what turned out to be the ultimate final version, which was read out before Muslims, and the Muslims accepted this order as the only order of the Quran.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, Dr. Zaheer, and there's a question that kind of relates to more younger people, and I will go ahead and ask it. They're asking how to study Quran so that we can apply it on a daily basis. So what are some of the prerequisites? What should we understand about Quran?
You should know the arrangement of the Quran, the way it is available now. Uh, there is no other way out for you but to actually start reading the Quran from one side, the beginning part, and move on and try to read it completely. But read it in a way that you understand what you're reading. Have a copy pencil or something that would enable you to write down your questions and put them down as and when you come across questions. And believe you me, if you are going to read the Quran with an open mind, you will have questions after questions, scores and hundreds of them. Try to find their answers. The more you're going to read the Quran, you will find that the questions that you had in mind to begin with are getting answered, but they are giving way to new questions. So, when you're going to study the Quran with an understanding of its text, allowing yourself the luxury of questioning what the Quran is saying, you will get clearer and clearer about the message of the Quran.
Thank you very much, sir. We are out of time for tonight, and on Sunday nights we're actually a little bit more sensitive. Dr. Zaheer has some other engagement after this, so thank you again, Dr. Zaheer. Inshallah, we'll see you next week.
Okay. Assalamu
Jazakallah.
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.